Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Jeff Lozano, host of Dedicated to the Craft. We have a very special 3-episode installment of Colby and Friends. In honor of Mr. Colby Chandler celebrating his 23 years with the company, we decided to bring in all his buddies that help him get there and achieve the greatness that is his career in brewing. We're going to bring on Tom Nickel. We're bringing on Chris White from White Labs. We're bringing in Chuck Silva from Silva Brewing Company. Pat McElhenney, I don't even need to talk about him. We got Jim Malay from Obi Brewing Company, Ryan Brook from South Norte, and you will be able to listen in on an awesome conversation over a couple of beers that Colby and his buddies are going to have. Tune in, crack open a beer, and stay along for the ride. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Dedicated to the Craft, a podcast brought to you by Ballast Point Brewing Company. I'm your host, Jeff Lozano, and I am really excited about today's show and upcoming shows. We have a very special treat for you. We have in light of Mr. Colby Chandler's 23rd anniversary with the company, we're going to bring on Colby and Friends, and you guys will be able to sit in, crack open a beer, and talk about they talk about, listen in to stories about massive beer drinking and the contribution that they've all done to the San Diego beer scene. So let me introduce Lord Chandler, Governor of the Point, Special Envoy to the Faithful. What's up, boss?
Looking forward to this.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. We got Mr. Tom Nickel, founder of Nickel Brewing up in Julian. What's up, my dude?
Hello, hello.
Hello, and Mr. Dr. Chris White, founder and president of the infamous White Labs. What's going on, stud?
Not much. Happy to be here. Thanks. It'll be fun.
Hey, listen. Well, let's get to it. We have a lot of beer to go through, so I think I started a little while ago, so I might be a little ahead. But right now, I am drinking out of this marvelous Nickel Brewing cup, and inside is also some marvelous Nickel Brewing beer. I'm going to be a fly on the wall, you guys. I'm really excited about your guys' relationships with each other and how everything has kind of woven into creating this fabric that is the San Diego beer scene. So, Colby, I'm going to kick it off to you, my friend. Let you talk to your friends.
So, first off, Papa Blanco, congrats on the upcoming beer drinker you made.
Thank you. Sitting in her room.
That's awesome.
A few more days, I think. Yeah.
So one of the reasons I brought you guys on was because when I started in July of 1997, you guys were already working there. Or actually, Tom had just stopped. I was a customer that came in, and Tom helped me with a few beers. I'll even pause, in particular, weed beer. We had some good weed beer conversations, how to infuse weed into beer. So that was super fun. And Chris, you were boiling up some wort in the back at the time in the first Nano Brewery in San Diego. You want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll shoot over to Tom?
Sure. Those were fun times. I'd go over there a couple days a week and use your little, what we'd call a Nano Brewery now. And I'd make my wort. And my funnest times were going over on Saturday morning. I didn't have a brewing system yet, and you guys were great to let me use yours to make my wort-free yeast. So I'd go in there and make it up and then bring it back to an autoclave I had to sterilize it. But I'd spend a few hours there making wort, talking to home brewers, and drinking a few beers and feeling a little better. And those were just fun Saturdays.
One of the reasons Homebrew Mart was kind of foundational in White Labs is because of the homebrew class you did with Yusuf. And he claims that he basically made White Labs by talking you into pitchable yeast. It depends on who you talk to, really.
I was lucky to have met a lot of great people. And without a lot of those people, there'd be no White Labs. And he's one of them. It was a really crazy coincidences and different stories. But I first walked into Homebrew Mart in 1992, soon after it opened, and saw Jack White behind the counter. Never saw him behind the counter again. But as soon as he hired Youssef and others, including Tom, but that first time. And soon after that, I saw that there was a class at UC San Diego and was taught by Youssef, who had just graduated from there, a bachelor's in philosophy. And it was about all grain brewing. And I had been homebrewing for a while, but never tried all grain. I thought, that sounds awesome. I want my beer to be better. And took the class, and we just hit it off, and started homebrewing together because he was interested in making beers. I was interested in making beers. I was working at a yeast lab. I think he noticed that could be cool and a good addition to his brewing adventures. And then he also was really interested in learning all of that.
And he hated smack packs.
Yeah. He wanted, his thing was, Chris, you need to sell us yeast that people can use that same day.
Mm-hmm.
And probably coined the pitchable term. My memory's a little foggy, but he probably did. Like, I want, yeast that homebrewers could come in. He was working on a Saturday. They could buy it on a Saturday and pitch it into their beer, because the yeast at that time, there was some good variety of strains in liquid form, but it took about 3 days to start a fermentation because there wasn't a lot of yeast there, or you had to make a starter and then wait a few days to make your beer.
So was that ultimately why you switched over from smack packs? Was that when Youssef said that?
He opened the door for my company. Like, he said, hey, why don't you make yeast and sell it right here? That doesn't happen a lot of times, right? And in my mind, I really wasn't even starting a company for the future. I was just just advancing the hobby and doing a little company on the side to make yeast and sell at Home Brew Mart. I mean, I would bring 50 vials on a Thursday, usually sell out by a Friday. And Jack and Youssef would say, make more, please. Hey, what are you doing? And I'm like, no, it's just a little side thing. I'm busy. I'm in grad school. I'll see you next Thursday.
Tom, you were using White Labs yeast back then, and you had a good story that you told us the other day. And I also want to get back to Chris a little bit on the first 2 strains of White Labs and what their names were. But Tom, you first.
So I mean, I was working there when Chris was doing this, as he thought of it, like as a side hobby. And, I remember there'd be afternoons where, like he said, he'd bring it by on a Wednesday or Thursday, and then we'd sell it out. And there'd be somebody in there, late on a Saturday or a Sunday. And I remember calling him, I think it was a Sunday afternoon. And, he's literally like mowing the lawn. And it's like, can you bring down more yeast? We're out. And he's like, oh, I think I've got like 10 vials in the cooler, but let me finish mowing the lawn and then I'll bring it down. And, you think now about, what an international company White Labs is. And, there I am bothering the poor guy, while he's working outside and making him drive down yeast on his day off. But, that's how it started. And the homebrew community was very much like that, all throughout San Diego. It's just everybody's pitching in, doing anything they could for anybody to make better beer because we were all learning, doing it together.
Yeah,
was that something that was fostered through in Home Brew Mart when you guys reflect on it now? That philosophy, that vibe, the craft beer community, besides its infancy, was it a camaraderie that was harnessed within the walls of Home Brew Mart that just started to spread throughout the rest of the town?
I certainly think so, but I think it also, I think it's just part of just San Diego in general. It's a laid back town. Everybody's, while some people are competitive, it's not, you against me. It was always kind of us against everybody else. And I think the homebrew community was very much like, oh, you know how to do something? Great. Can you teach me that? Or, oh, how'd you make this beer better? And, certainly when we would all share recipes and people like Colby would come in and we'd talk about recipes. And, I think about some of the long time, regular customers, Uwe, Dave Livonian, Harold Gilbranson, people would come in every week and you'd talk to them, pick their brains, and, they'd learn from me, I'd learn from them. And then, what you learned, you just spread to other people. So I absolutely think that's true.
You also have to
Home Brew Mart, was a special place in a special community of these really active homebrewers. And I'm not surprised that a brewery like Ballast Point was born out of it and flourished because it was so creative, so fun, young, smart people working there. and we just wanted, and everyone just want to talk about beer all day. It was just an amazing, time and place. Yeah.
Well, what most people forget is that we didn't have internet. There wasn't an abundance of information in your pocket. We actually had to read books and go to breweries and talk to brewers and hang out with home brewers. And that's how the beer got better in the long run. You know what I mean? We made up a lot of the changes. A lot of the books and information was antiquated a little bit too. It was, made 10 years ago, like those books from the time that you were actually using them. So it was the only way to push things forward was to taste and collaborate and work together to make the beer better in the long run. And I think White Labs was a huge part of that. I think having the ability to get fresh yeast locally in San Diego is a reason we really started to win awards. I think personally, I think that really was a huge step for us to have, one of the 4 ingredients actually available here in San Diego. And I think a lot of people don't give you enough credit for that.
Well, thanks. I think we were just all trying to make better beer. And my expertise was in yeast. I loved yeast. I still love yeast and craft beer. So I kind of went that direction. Somebody else went another direction. And really, we're just trying to make better beer and just love talking about beer and yeast all day long. I mean, I'd hang out with these guys at night too. I remember being over Tom's house and meeting his parents and then kind of giving him a hard time about working at a home brew store. Turned out pretty good.
But speaking of that, like Tom, you were employee number 6. Ryan Glenn was number 7, and then Colby, you were number 8.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, no one's keeping track. There was no books. Nobody was getting paid.
Tom would know.
No one was getting
Well,
paid.
Paul Allison has to be in there somewhere.
Did he get hired after you or before you?
After me.
So
Yeah.
then he would be.
Because I don't know if any of you guys, Chris, you probably remember Jim that used to work there. Kind of hippie dude.
Yeah.
So
and Nucci.
he left in sort of a shotgun wedding situation. I was working there just 2 days a week. And I was thinking, well, hey, I'm going to fill up my summer after college, do something fun, and not worry about it. And he left, and all of a sudden there was a full-time position, and it was like, do you want it? And I was like, yep, I'll take it. And then Paul got hired on shortly before Ballast Point actually opened. And then I remember we hired Ryan before we had the little tasting room, which wasn't even a tasting room. It was a tasting counter. We had that 4-tap kegerator.
Yep.
And Ryan was not yet 21 when we hired him. And Jack's like, what's the use of hiring this guy? He's not 21. He can't work the tasting bar. I'm like, look, he's 21 in a couple of months. Trust me, this guy's the right hire. And then 17 years later at Ballast Point, now owner of High Dive. So, it was pretty funny there.
So
Yeah.
that would make you 6, Paul 7, Ryan 8, me 9.
Something like that.
And then Nucci was before that.
Nucci was before me. Jim was before me. Yusuf was before me.
Yeah, and that was it. That was it.
Yeah.
That's insane. It's interesting how many people were thrusted into the world of this beautiful art because it was just like a serendipitous moment in their lives. And I find that in the brewing world, not just limited to beer, but in general in the booze world, I guess, you find a lot of people that reflect back to the moments where they made that transition, where they said, hey, I'm on a new path, I'm on this trajectory, and it's been the best thing that's ever happened to them. Chris, what was the turning point for you? How did you get into the world of providing yeast primarily for brewers? And I don't even know if that's primarily the bulk of your sales.
Yeah, well, like I said, it started in Homebrew Mart, and that's what we focused on. But soon after, the first brewery I sold yeast to was Pizza Port, because they had opened, and Vince was brewing the beer, and Vince and Gina were, turned their little pizza place into a brewery, pulled out the bathrooms and put a brewery in. And I went in there and he said, would you like, I can make you some yeast? And he said, sure. It was kind of that simple. I brought him some, and I traded yeast for pizza for years and years after that. And then I thought, well, if I can make these pitchable sizes for homebrewers, I'll make it for a 7-barrel batch of beer. And then everything was kind of built on 7 barrels batches after that. But a lot of people are way past that size now. And then a few more breweries would open in San Diego, but there were still only a few, and I just still kept it as a side hobby. But as things kept going, I got an offer after UCSD at a 6-figure salary at a local biotech company to work on this yeast strain that I had been kind of working on. We were one of the first people to work on this special yeast strain that's not Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And I thought, okay, great, but I'll keep my little side business. And they came back to me and said, no, you can't have a side business. And I really didn't think much about it. I just said, well, I can't take the job then because I don't want to leave this beer yeast thing behind. And kind of naive, I guess. I didn't know what it was going to take, but glad I did it. And that was just, again, this passion and this community that was around us that helped, we're part of something.
Hey, can we talk about the beer we're drinking?
Yeah, absolutely.
Forgotten Soldiers and the Rye IPA.
Tom, what's up, dude? This is beautiful. This is,
and obviously what yeast you're using in this?
Oh, well, this would actually be White Labs yeast. There we can shink virtually. Oh. So this the project actually originally started out. Sierra Nevada was going to do another round of their resilience for the Australian wildfires, and then of course everything happened and COVID happened and keeping us all virtual. And it's actually nice to hang out with people not wearing masks, even if it is over a computer. But we had the ingredients kind of gathered up, and we were going to do a rye IPA out of it. And COVID hits, and then we're like, well, let's do something else with this. So let's turn it into a beer for the situation here. And so we were going to call it Resilience after that for the Sierra Nevada. So my brewer, Brian Scanlon, came up with the idea of calling it First Rye Sponders and doing it as a benefit beer. We have a PTSD center up here in Julian, the Inner North Star PTSD Retreat Center, and they do no-cost PTSD retreats for veterans and first responders. And so they've expanded that now for healthcare workers during the COVID crisis. And so we did it as a benefit beer for them with our friends at Amplified. So it's a rye IPA. So not truly a hazy IPA, but it's got rye malt and a little flaked wheat in it, which makes it kind of hazy. And then bittered. I think it's bittered with Vic Secret and then Vic Secret and Nelson to finish. So all Southern Hemisphere hops, and just a real nice kind of drinkable, floral. Like I said, lightly hazy, but not a hazy IPA because hopped like a West Coast IPA.
It's good. I like it.
It's tasty, man.
It's
awesome.
Nice. It's actually got a nice dryness to it. It lingers. It's hitting all of the palate, and it doesn't taste like cotton candy. So I'm stoked. No, yeah, it's probably 15% rye in the grist, right. So it was pretty high. We used a lot of rice hulls because of all the rye and the flaked wheat. So, how do you describe the aroma and flavor of raw rye?
Wow, peppery, earthy. I don't know.
It's always a hard one for me too. Because most people just think pumpernickel, right?
Right.
So it's not that spicy.
But I love what the rye does to the beer. That kind of real black pepper earthiness.
I think it's a lightness.
It gives it a nice little spice that's right underneath the hops and kind of elevates all the hop flavors to me.
So like a lightness with still adding, ironically, a little bit of body as well.
Yeah.
Using the right percentage or in the right quantities, depending on what you're brewing, I think it's really refreshing.
Check this out, Chris.
Hey! Wow!
That's a flash. This is one of my favorite. This is one of my favorite yeasts. Always the British. But
that's awesome. How old is that?
This is old school.
The first pitch.
That's
The best
old,
thing-
but that's still not the earliest ones. Yeah.
Yeah, because
That
they
one
didn't have
actually has the
names on
plastic
them.
stand. It stands on its own, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you'd have to put
Yeah,
it
the
in
really
the-
early ones just were the cone bottom, and you had to keep them in the little styrofoam tray.
Yeah, and Yusuf made the first label for California ale yeast off of little computer I had back at UCSD student housing, and I would kind of hand apply those in the beginning, and then I was just making so many. Like I said in the beginning, I just started delivering them without any label. So some of the earliest ones had no label, which is a little silly, and then kind of got into these labels.
And for everybody that's listening and not watching, Colby, what did you just show everybody on the camera right there?
This was the original, or the second version, I guess, of the White Lab file that was available in the late 90s. Kind of.
That's so awesome.
It's basically how I stored all my weed for a long time.
Airtight.
Airtight.
Fresh out of the autoclave.
So, was it originally called Homebrew Mart Ale Yeast and Homebrew Mart Lager, and that became California and German Lager?
Yeah. So, gosh, if we have any of, I don't even know if I have anybody has any of those old labels left. But you're right. At the beginning, probably that early label. Yeah, you're really hitting some old memories here. That early label said something about HBM ale yeast. I think is probably what it said, something like that. Yeah.
It is California and German Pilsner. You're still your two top sellers.
The first lager yeast was actually the kind of steam style yeast, the San Francisco lager. Yeah, because that's just what I was using in home brewing, and we could ferment at a little higher temperatures, like 62, 63 Fahrenheit, and then German lager came after that.
So when people describe a percentage for the flavor that yeast gives to the beer, what's your exact percentage?
Well, Colby, it's 99%. Yeah, I'm kidding.
You went a percentage, 1% lower than
that's when
I
you
thought.
don't put it in the beer, you just do shots of it.
We know there's no beer without yeast, right? The yeast has to make the alcohol, make CO2, especially in the past. But anyway, it does, and then flavor compounds. But beer stands apart from all these other food and beverages that yeast make because the yeast flavors are there and you can taste them. Try to search any kind of baking literature for yeast flavor contribution, and you can't find it because the bakers forgot about it. I'm being a little dramatic, but they just think of it as gas and breaking down gluten and all that kind of stuff. But of course it does make flavors, but brewers never forgot it because that's how dominant yeast characters are in beer. Whether they communicated to customers or not, because it's complicated to talk about microbiology and weird, especially before craft brewing, and we're all weird, right? So, brewers know the first 5-gallon batch of beer you make or whatever it is in homebrew, you're like, yeast is doing something important, and boy, this tastes different. And so they contribute over 500 flavored aroma compounds that you can taste in various amounts in beer. And that's a huge variety because beer flavors for pretty low in terms of malt and hops, even today. You don't post treat it in a way that removes yeast character. So it's there and it contributes amazing complexity. There's no fruitiness in malted barley, right? Barley is not fruity. All that fruitiness, except for a few new hop varieties, come from yeast. And that's cool on itself, that they can make things that taste like apple and pear and all of this complexity from all these little acids that yeast make and esters. Really an incredible portfolio that brewers have to manage that yeast in order that it tastes right.
A long time ago, when Pete was the head brewer, Pete Ahern, we took some Black Marlin and we divvied it up into like 6 different carboys, and we pitched different yeast. And that's what we served at the Southern California Homebrewers Festival. That was the first one I had ever went to. And that was my, aha moment with yeast, to see how different each of the beers tasted just because of the yeast. Everything else was exactly the same. So, and then eventually getting into like blending yeast and stuff too. I don't think a lot of people talk about that very much, that brewers yeast don't necessarily overwhelm themselves, so that when you pitch them in at a certain percentage, they kind of create those fruity flavors and those esters and compounds on their own. So you can kind of blend them, do little blends yourself sometimes.
Yeah, Colby and Tom, I know you've probably done lots of blends, and that when you add yeast together, those flavors kind of add together, and then you get some of the physical characteristics kind of blending, like co-flocculation and dryness of the driest strain, but you get a combination of those flavor characteristics. And we'd all still be doing that today if it wasn't for people like Louis Pasteur and Emil Christian Hansen in Copenhagen that got to the point where, like, let's make a beer out of a pure culture. That was extremely weird in the late 19th century, right? When you didn't even really know about microbiology yet, to purify yeast and say, let's make beer out of a pure strain. And it's kind of what we still do today, but it makes beers that lack a little complexity if you compare it to mixed, but it makes the making of it better, easier, more consistent, and repeatable, and also being able to reuse the yeast culture. So, but folks like you guys that have combined yeast and done blends over the time, I'm sure you've seen it when we make different beers with blends and do sensory over the ask customers what they think. People generally choose the blends as their favorite.
Yeah.
There you go.
Speaking of single strain and blends,
let's go ahead and give this a listen real quick. Ooh. It's a familiar sound, gentlemen.
So I have a question, Tom. Why did you hate the walls so much at Homebrew Mart?
It's not that question come up, and I'm like, why did I hate the walls so much? I don't know why you think I hate the walls so much.
Because there was holes in the walls, and it says Tom's paw next to it.
Yeah, I don't remember how that happened. I do remember that being there, but I don't remember what caused that.
It was there for a long time too.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. You were intimidating. Did you hate it when we would start a beer out and then change the name?
Oh, no, I love that. It was my favorite thing.
Why did you buy O'Brien's instead of Liars Club?
O'Brien's was for sale.
All right.
That's actually a funny story. So if it weren't for an employee at Stuffed Pizza sending back a UPS package that I'd ordered some parts for cask making, I was gone at a conference, was planning on coming back, casking up a beer. It had my name on it, so he had sent it back thinking that it was something personal and that I shouldn't be receiving it at work. And so I went down to UPS to pick it up, and they had already shipped it back to UK Brewing Supplies in Pennsylvania, because of course it showed up on the Monday that I was gone. I was gone all week, and then I show up the following week. They tried to deliver the package a couple times. It kept getting refused. They sent it back, so I'm down at UPS in Kearney Mesa, 2 blocks from O'Brien's, and I'm like, this is really frustrating. I need a beer. Go in, have a beer, talk to the founder of O'Brien's, Jim O'Brien, that night, and that's when he told me the place was for sale. That was in July, and by January 1, I'd taken over. So if that package had been delivered, he might have sold to somebody else.
Wow. Between Liars Club and O'Brien's, I mean, a lot of beers. That was the first places. Those two were the first place that a lot of them were poured outside the brewery. In particular, Crystal Pier, which eventually became Dorado, was Jim O'Brien before you bought it, and then Sculpin after you bought O'Brien's was the first place it was poured. Chris, I always hear this story about. So Crystal Pier I made for the second Strong Ale Fest that Tom was putting on at Pizza Port. And I was only making, I went to the first one and everything was just so cloyingly sweet. Old ales, imperial stouts, barley wines.
Wheat wines.
I walked out of there like, for God's sake, give me something bitter. So I vowed for the next year to do an 8% hoppy beer just to get into the festival. So that's how I made Crystal Pier. I loved Brutal Bitter, which was 100% crystal hops from Rogue. And I made a 10-gallon homebrew batch, basically off first runnings off of Yellowtail with some candied sugar and crystal hops and Cali yeast. And we, it was gone the first night of the festival because White Labs drank pitchers of it. And they basically just killed the whole keg the first night. And then the second year I made 20 gallons and they came in and they drank all of it the second year too. Is that a memory that you remember, Chris, at all? Am I getting that even close to right?
Well, you know, probably surprisingly, no, I probably don't remember it, but I was there. You know, all those early festivals, those, you know, strong ale festivals, it was so great. You know, we weren't traveling much as, you know, early, younger company, small company people, right? So except for the national stuff. So every festival that came up, which was not every weekend like it was before COVID, you know, you really knew when something was happening. And those strong ale festivals and different things, we were at every one. And I would bring most of my team, and we'd get hotels and stuff, and we would drink the best beer. So congratulations. We would drink dry, tasty, hoppy, a little bit of alcohol. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was not going to get by our crew.
That was the session beer of the festival. And that's when they were still held inside.
Inside. Three strong ales were inside.
Do you remember that? Do you remember Crystal Pure at all? Or like, because then the next year was Rogue I2PA and I think Pure Hoppiness. And then eventually Pliny came down. But those first couple years, it was one of the few hoppy strong beers. It wasn't even a double IPA. We called it a strong hoppy ale. And eventually,
it took a while for double IPA to actually catch on as a name.
Eventually, Jim O'Brien pressured me in. He's like, "What do you mean you can't buy any for O'Brien's?" So I actually had to make a 20-gallon homebrew batch, and I blended it into a 15-gallon keg and sold it to Jim O'Brien.
You know, I remember the first time I walked into Ballast Scripps Ranch, and there was 2 IPAs on tap. I was like, "Why do you need 2? What was one?" And I remember that was the first time that happened. And
right? Really, 2 IPAs.
Why do you need 2?
Yeah. Oh, you got to have all these other beers. And now, of course, there's so many bars that are just IPAs, and we're doing IPAs. You know, but you know, it was just like, why would you have 2 red ales? Why would you have 2? That's where IPA was, and it just grew into the thing, and so delicious, and proving so many people wrong, because early on people would say like, oh, you're just chucking a bunch of hops in it. The IPA, no, brewers here and elsewhere show that no, you can craft completely different IPAs that are still IPAs.
That's what I loved about Big Eye and Sculpin. They were so completely different, kind of like these 2 that we got.
Just these.
So,
yeah, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we're drinking?
I would like to ask Chris one question before he talks about the beers. How stoked are you that you can your product now instead of running it through a 22-ounce Maheen?
Oh, I just waited until there was an alternative. Yeah. I have gone to so many breweries, and you know, the biggest thing is how hard Maheen is. Maheens are to run. You guys have done them, and in bottled beer, that we just kind of waited, and you know, we really only did the brewery. We did the brewery in 2012. Well, I guess every home brewer wants to do their own brewery, but I didn't want to do something competitive and like put beer on a shelf or take tap handles. I just wanted to do something additive and have our own tap room, and then kind of showcase science and yeast and do things that just promote the what yeast does in beer. And so we really were cautious at kind of doing any kind of package. But we talked about cans for a while, and then COVID happens, and you got to sell some to-go beer. And it kind of gives an opportunity to also just give the brewers some morale boost of like, let's do something with this beer that's not selling because the tap room's not open. But also get the message out a little bit more. So we were able to do mobile canning, which is huge. I mean, that's something that wasn't there a number of years ago.
Well, Tom, most people don't realize why beer went into 22-ounce bottles. I mean, it wasn't the most great. It's not the most perfect packaging. You kind of need a friend sometimes, but that's the only thing that was available, right?
Yeah, I mean, bottle wise, there's no options. I mean, people
Packaging.
didn't drink beer in cans, and I mean, the you know, the original stigma of cans was like, hey, if it's in a can, it's a cheap beer. And so even if a craft brewer in the 90s had the opportunity to put beer into cans, they would have never done it because it would have gone, against the grain of like, hey, I'm trying to make a high quality product. I want it in a dark glass bottle. I want it to stand out. We don't want to use green glass. We don't want to use clear glass. We don't want to use cans. And I mean, I remember, people talking about these is packaging options and that stigma of cheap beer, bad beer, skunky beer, early on. And now it's like everything's in cans. I mean, you get wine in cans, you get cocktails in cans, you get beer in cans, and everybody loves it. They're lightweight. You can take them anywhere, anywhere you can take alcohol, but and they sound good when you open them.
It definitely sounds
I
good.
love cans when they first came out. And there was a lot of controversy still. A lot of breweries said, I'll never do cans. I just love them. I was getting fresh beer. And it tasted great. In 2013, I think it was, I stayed in Puerto Rico for 6 months doing a sabbatical with somebody I had gone to grad school with at UCSD and had a yeast lab there. And it was the first and only one because everything got too busy after that again to do it again. But I came back to San Diego once, and Ballast just started canning. And I brought them some Scopen in cans. And I was basically being attacked. I almost said, hey, guys, I have a girlfriend. Like, hey, get back. Get back. I know, but also they had never seen beer in cans like that before, and craft beer, and they had never tasted Scopen that was fresh before. I brought it to them, but it was like, and Scopen was really starting to gain a name. So that was my can experience. But I just loved the billboard part of it, the portability part. And I didn't worry about old big beers in cans. I don't have a stigma against big beers. I like the whole brewing industry. That's my opinion.
My best can experience was actually Coors Light. We got to tour through the Coors Factory. So Tom Nickel, there's a guy who worked for Coors. His name was Jeff Nickel, spelled exactly the same. So when we would judge at Great American Beer Festival, our packets would always be together. We struck up a friendship, obviously, because of our last name. So it's like, and he actually grew up on the same street as Vince and Gina in Colorado. So it's super small world. So we go on a, he takes us on a tour of the Coors Factory, which is like a small city. The place has a moat around it that they use for cooling water. Everything but like the bottle cap is made in Coors. Or in Golden, they have their own glass factory. Rail cars come to just pack all the beer up. It's insane. The thing's like 7 or 8 stories, its own malting facility. So they're walking us all over this thing at like 7,500 feet in Golden. And I swear to God, there's not a drinking fountain in the entire building. And so we're just up the stairs, down the stairs, around the building, in the building, out the building. Finally, we get to the canning line, and I mean, just hundreds of cans per minute of Coors Light. Like you can see it in the tank getting drained, 32 degrees. You can see a can get filled, spin around. It's into the boxing area, like 30 seconds later. And they're like, go ahead, just take one. And we're like, okay, great. And you pop it open, 32 degree, ice cold Coors Light after you've had nothing to drink for like an hour in a brewery. And I'm like, I still tell people that's one of the best 10 beer drinking moments of my entire life.
The Rockies were
and
blue.
It was Coors Light. Because it's not always about the beer, it's about the moment, the people, whatever it is. But it just, that moment in time, absolutely one of my top 10 beer drinking experiences.
Oh, that's refreshing to hear, man. That's awesome.
I always like people ask me what my favorite beer is, and I'm all the one that enhances the moment I'm in.
Yeah, there you go.
And that's kind of it. Speaking of the moment we're in, talk about the whole basis of the tap room at White Labs and why you're offering 2 different beers and 4 packs, and like.
Well, as you said, your example from making a beer and putting it with different yeasts and bringing it to a beer festival. That's what I was doing with homebrewing. That's what I was doing with Yusef back in his parents' backyard in La Jolla, making these different batches that helped me develop yeast strains and helped him develop beer recipes. We would split it out a lot, and he'd take 5 gallons and I'd take 5 gallons, and we'd compare it later. And then I would do that at different things. And White Labs, we would do that all the time when people had the time to do it. And so I wanted to do our brewery again in kind of educational, fun, science way. So I wanted every batch to be split into different fermenters. So that's kind of upending the way most people make beer. They make beer in a smaller brew house and put it into big fermenters and multiple fill them. I'm a little bit bigger brew house, say a 20-barrel brewery into 5-barrel fermenters, 4 of them. Usually we do 2 now because 4 gets a little exhausting. And it allows us to put more styles on tap. And you get the idea. You put a beer into 2 different fermenters, you pitch 2 different yeast strains, like we've got here with our IPA with California ale yeast and East Coast ale yeast, gives a kind of a hazy feel as well, or look to it. And then try them. And it's just fun to see people come in, off the street into our tap room, don't know anything about yeast, and in 5 minutes, give them a beer. They try a beer with 2 different yeasts, and they go, "Oh, I get what yeast do." And I spent hours talking to people about that, and it's hard to describe it until you taste it. And sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can fill a fermenter and then sometimes fill another fermenter. But we designed the whole brewery to do an identical batch, run into 2 different fermenters. So it's not a different day. It's not a slightly different thing that happens. It's the same beer with 2 different yeast strains. And some people just can't believe it. They're like, no, you've added some spice in here. You've done something different here. And that's the fun of the yeast story. We get to do that. And the idea of doing the cans is let people that can't get to the tap room now taste it. So that's our first foray into it. Although, I don't really know what I'm doing with cans. So the joke is, which one's the California ale yeast? Which one's the East Coast ale yeast? Oops, I made it too small for you to read. So got to get better.
I was gonna say you gotta include these with the 4-packs.
Yeah, and we're mixing the 4-pack. So here's what's going to happen. Somebody's going to have the California ale yeast and have the next one go like, "Oh, that's totally different. That sucks." Oops, they're supposed to be different. So I'll get better at that.
Unless they actually smell them, because for me, the California, and this kind of accentuates that, always has this apricot kind of aroma to it. And this has kind of a lemon. So I'm kind of in that orange to yellow color kind of fruit. Whereas the East Coast is super like red, like strawberry to me, kind of like a just ripening strawberry almost, or, just starting to get into that deep kind of ripeness on the vine. So I taste a lot in colors that way. That narrows things down a little bit faster for me.
That's cool.
Yeah. Well, they're both really
tasty with people and learning like JBF and things like that. Just learning how other people describe beers has been one of the most awesome parts of this industry.
So one of the fun things about judging, and you guys are both seasoned veterans, is winning at contests. And I was in the room when you won the World Beer Cup that was held in San Diego, Tom.
Back in 2004.
2004.
With Jeff Bagby.
What was that like?
Yeah. Can you just talk about what that meant to you in your career?
Well, it was enormous. And this was before they kind of had like the Brewing Team Awards that they do now. But certainly, Jeff Bagby, amazingly talented brewer. Between us, we won 3 medals as a company. And it was funny because we had just opened the OG's Brewing Company production facility in San Clemente. So that was going under the Left Coast brand, eventually for distribution. But so one of those beers, we'd built a 30-barrel brewery with 60-barrel tanks, and the stout that won the silver medal was the very first batch of beer we brewed on that system, and it ended up winning a medal for 3 months later at World Beer Cup. It was just a huge moment. I'd won GABF medals, I'd won World Beer Cup medals, but to win the Small Brewing Company of the Year award was just such an enormous honor, and to be able to do it with Jeff, who's such a good friend. Just meant everything, and to do it in San Diego and to have, all of my brewing industry friends there was just unbelievable. It was just an incredible night. And Lost Abbey then won that award when the World Beer Cup came back to San Diego in 2008. So, we had a good run of San Diego breweries winning that award in San Diego, which was just fantastic to be a part of.
We were 2010, and then Coronado also did it.
It just kept going.
There's so many I've forgotten.
Yeah.
Was that Black Magic Stout?
Yes, which I believe has been rebranded as Voodoo Stout
Right.
these days. But
I love that beer. Like I've judged that beer and given it awards. So it's really good. It's a really good beer. Speaking of content,
I judged what the Imperial Vanilla Porter.
Oh yeah,
and unfortunately didn't
Victory
give it an
at
award.
Sea. Yeah.
Victory at Sea. There was a judge who did not like the vanilla flavor.
No victory.
But it did not belong in the Imperial Porter category because of it.
How dare you?
Because it was in the coffee category.
That's what it was.
Yep, and they shouldn't be vanilla in the coffee category because that's a spice category. But there is no category for coffee and spice.
For a spiced coffee beer.
Yes.
I argued for it. You finished fourth. You didn't get a medal, but
right. No, it's nice to know. I would have rather had the medal. Thanks, though. Speaking of medals, Chris, I've been asking for years for you to do a contest where you actually test the beers, and if they're entered in a category that they're not hitting the specs, they're thrown out.
Well, that would be pretty interesting. And we could do that. I first few times I thought you were joking, but I guess you're serious. And, because we one of the things we did at the same time we were building the yeast lab and the microbiology, we built an analytical lab because I like chemistry and I thought it was an important part of the laboratory kind of thing we should do that most people didn't really care about for a while, but now it really stands on its own as an independent, testing lab. So we do nutritional labels, we do things for different spirits, we do gluten, we do qPCR, we do lots of different things. And so we do our big QC day where we try to do it real affordable for breweries to send in these samples and learn a lot about their beer. And sometimes that's the only time they do it. To funnel a competition through that might be good. And, with the homebrew clubs like Quaff and the others in San Diego, like a huge, strong community that's been really helpful to White Labs over the years too, with innovation things and beta testing things and judging stuff. I think we have everything here we could really do that with. Make your idea reality.
Sometimes I feel like part of the judging that's not actually written down anywhere or given a number is if you think the beer is to style, because all you can do is just assume that the brewer is entering it into the style and it's falling within the ABV, it's falling within the IBU, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of subjectivity that comes in when I judge, sometimes to like, am I tasting alcohol? Like where's the body coming from? You know what I mean? There's different things where I wouldn't even have to think about that if I knew that it was all in spec. And then you just go straight off the test, right?
Interesting. So out of spec, out of the competition?
Out of spec, out of it. Yep.
I mean, it doesn't.
Hey, well, look, you guys need to download.
I'll tee it up. It's not going to be cheap.
Beers in a short amount of time. We built a high volume sort of testing ability, so it's possible.
Well, you could also do like a certain style, like a single style.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You wouldn't have to do multiple styles. And the fact that the judging pool is so deep here in San Diego, I mean, it's hard not to take advantage of that as well.
One thing that's always boggled my mind is, as far as the judging is concerned, is how much you have to kind of understand or know, at least rather, and how your palate needs to develop to all these different styles and different categories, and then X amount of beers per category and stuff like that. And I've always thought, what happens when a judge isn't really particularly familiar with that style? And with that, I mean, is like, this goes out to the three of you. Is there a beer style that you haven't brewed, that you've always been wanting to brew, that you are, that's still on the back burner?
What's the smoked wheat beer? It's like I
know what you're.
The real low alcohol. I forget the name of it.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about too.
It's not the smoked hef. I've always wanted like a grosser.
Yeah, I think
something like that.
All your listeners are going, yeah, I know it.
Yeah. Type it in. But that's mine. That's for me. That's mine.
We just smoked Weizenbach once. That's about as close as I've come to that. I was with Scott Blair, who loves smoked beer. So,
Yep, we're eye to eye on that particularly.
and I love them. Like I know it's, to me, the most controversial style. People love the sourest beers, the craziest things, the weirdest foods, and then they're like, "Oh, smoky beer, yucky." Yeah, and I don't really get that. But to me, it's so controversial. I think they taste great.
That's not me. Speaking of yeasty beers, kind of saison-esque, white pepper-ish.
Ooh,
Where are you going with this, Colby?
Maybe a little nutmeg, maybe a little thyme, maybe a little Centennial, maybe a little Whitaker Farms honey, wheat, Munich, Pilsner.
okay, got me into it.
I got the recipe in front of it.
Jesus, yeah, come on.
And then obviously best wishes, right? Saludos.
Just for me.
Saludos. I like that.
Good thing my brothers
Get this one on the.
Wait, I got a glass for this.
And I don't know about your guys's, but mine says filled in 2017.
Yep.
Oh
This
my
was
God.
the beer we made for the 25th anniversary of Homebrew Mart. It was just shy of 8%. We both love Avec Le Vin Bleu. Le Vin Vu. Avec Le Bon Vu. Avec Le Bon Vu.
Man, it smells good. Dude, I went digging for this in your cellar, Colby, and I swear I thought it was like a lambic. It was just full of dust and it was full of cobwebs. And I was like, we need to drink this.
You know, it's an old beer if it's got like black exhaust from the 4 or 5 different cold rooms from the forklift.
It did. And for anybody watching this, we're gonna plug in a photo of the collar because the collar is a sight to see.
Well, cheers, gentlemen.
Cheers, my
Thank
friends.
you for digging us out of the cellar.
Salud.
And boy, you talk about a yeast-driven beer. This is it, man. That yeast it fermented at high temperature. What did we start at? Like 78, and then ramp up.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
Maybe Chris can talk about why that is. And it took me a little while to figure out that it was more of a wine yeast that came from like Wallonia almost a little bit, like the border of France and Belgium. And that's why it loves the warmer fermentation temperatures. And a lot of homebrewers make the mistake of fermenting too cool, and that's what stalls it out.
Yeah, because, you know, again, all this late 19th century brewing led everything to lagers, you know, pure strains. Then we get into stainless, we get into conical, we get into, and that was fine for lagers. And then, you know, little bits of the world stayed doing something different. And some of that doing something different was fermenter geometry and fermentation temperature. So when craft brewers came along, I think it took a while to, even with the yeast strains, like I could say, oh, here's the yeast strain, but I don't really know at that time too as much about, you know, what people were doing with it. And you know, so you gotta take these other strains in a different way. And that applies to almost every new sort of even like wild strain you find. They don't like cold because all microbes like warmer temperatures. Saccharomyces cerevisiae's favorite temperature or optimum temperature for growth, if you look at a bell curve, is 90 degrees Fahrenheit. We keep ales down at 68 on average to keep them from making all these other little flavors, but they've been trained at that temperature to ferment good. You take a strain that has not been fermented at that temperature, it's not going to ferment very well. So then we could maybe go to Belgium and fermenter geometry. If you have a bigger open fermenter where the yeast can really actively ferment. So it's almost like another topic. There's temperature and there's geometry. If any of you, and I'm sure you guys here have, if you fermented in open fermenters, you notice it ferments faster. Yeast like open fermenters. Conical was made for something else, right?
Right.
They love the open fermenters. Yeast just blossom and grow fast and make a nice flavor characteristic. So you combine that with a temperature that's a little bit higher, and then they really express their flavors and their growth factors. We put them at a conical. We put them too cold. They're just not going to do what they're supposed to do.
I was fortunate enough years ago to do a little beer called Marion Berry's Better Than a Crack Whore Lambic.
Sounds delicious.
With Peter Ahern that eventually turned into Sour Wench. We were kind of doing home brews in the beginning, working with temperatures, dealing with gummy mashes. And at one point I'm like, can't we sour in the kettle and avoid the mash tun and all the gumminess? And is the gumminess going to burn on the bottom of the direct fire? And what are the temperatures and all that kind of stuff? And that's kind of eventually what we did was we started kettle souring, which I feel like nobody was really doing for a good decade while we were making Sour Wench. Do you have any opinion on that, Chris?
I mean, Sour Wench was a really creative, weird beer that I thought was not very good at the time because it was just challenging my palate. Like the first time I went to Cantillo and I was like, does somebody else want this? It seems ridiculous now because I'll treasure every moment I go there now and every sour beer I could get. So yeah, I just think you really challenged people with that beer early on. It was like something we didn't have before.
A lot of people didn't realize that we were actually using lacto off of different types of two-row. So it had like almost a little bit of natural fauna. That's what we were starting, the cultures within the kettle. And that was before we were doing higher temperatures. So you got a lot of butyric there. And we weren't doing CO2, layers on top. But once we got it into that 125 range where everything else dies off except for the lacto and a little bit of CO2, then that's when it just, I think that was the heyday for sure. Tom, how much do you like Tyson? How much do you love Tyson Blake?
More than I can express with words. If he were here, I could hug him enough that maybe you'd get the idea. It's funny. I remember when he hired him, people were like, "Oh my God, you hired your little brother." Like, well, in a sense, yes, but we're not related.
100%. What's up with I want to get into the COVID thing with you guys, kind of finishing up what you guys are doing at your places, how people can come get the beer, all that kind of good stuff. But I've had actually a couple people ask me about the Del Mar contest and what's the future of that and, where we're at.
Well, so we're going to send out an announcement this very soon here. We are planning to do the judging in September and probably third week of September and collect beers towards the end of August and make a go of it. So we think we can socially distance. We think we can, receive all the beer, store it, even though the races are going on right now. The racetrack will be empty by then. Nothing else will be happening on the fairgrounds. We'll literally have the whole grandstand to ourselves, so we'll be able to keep everybody nice and far apart and try to judge the competition. And as an added bonus, and you guys are the first people to hear this, because I love wet hop beers myself, and we've always judged the competition in April or May, because we're judging in September. I'm like, hey, why don't we add a wet hop beer category? So we're going to for this year.
Sweet.
Yeah, dude.
Awesome.
So we'll probably have to receive the wet hop beers that week, but I'm willing to pretty much do whatever it takes and bend over backwards to get those beers into the competition, whether they're from locally California grown hops or from Northwest grown hops. If we can get the beer, even 2 or 3 days in advance, get it labeled, get it settled, and, even 10 or 12 beers in the category, it would just make my day to be able to judge wet hop beers in that competition.
I am going to plant the seed for Schooner right now.
Awesome, dude. That's awesome. That's great news.
Schooner. Done for a long, long time. You have a little bit of education in medieval history.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, let's get to the bottom of this, Colby.
Jeff introduced me earlier. The new owners of Kings and Convicts, if people don't know. The king, Chris Bradley, is actually from England, and the convict, Brendan, is actually from Australia. So that's where the Kings and Convicts come from. And those are kind of cheeky. So hence my new job title, Lord Chandler, Governor of the Point, Special Envoy to the Faithful. Can you please tell me what my job title means?
We're all curious.
It means you're well connected at the highest levels.
Is that
so
too
as
many?
A Lord,
is it too many?
Would have been a landowner, a steward of a large property with tenant farmers who provided you with food or labor in exchange for the use of the land. As a governor, you were typically a high-ranking member of a business association, private merchant, and so they're kind of mixing titles here. So you're both landed nobility, gentrified merchant class, and then as a special envoy to the faithful, it would basically give you key access to the monarch, the king or queen, at the absolute highest levels as a go-between between them and anybody that they wanted you to communicate with.
Jesus.
So in this case, you are basically direct from the owners to the people, and you are a captain of industry, and you are a steward of this company for 23 very long and very deserved years. And I applaud you for that, because
wow, that's
truly
awesome.
one of my favorite people in the San Diego brewing scene, and somebody I'm proud to call a friend. And I am so happy that without our paths really having crossed professionally, that one door opened, one door closed for me, and the door opened for you, and that our history has been completely intertwined ever since.
That is the most beautiful explanation. Colby, can you fit all that on your business card?
I can.
Okay,
good.
We'll just make a YouTube video of it, and you can put the link there.
It's going to come with these.
Hey, by the way,
that was very eloquent. Thank you.
For anybody listening that's going like, how the hell, what Renaissance fair did this guy come out of? Why don't you tell everybody listening what your background is in that particular discipline?
So I have a BA in medieval history from Yale University.
That's legit. That is as legit as you can get.
It's a great qualification for owning a brewery and a bar. I'll tell you that.
Since we're still inspired by Homebrew Mart, and we still make, quality beers because of it, and approachable, and what advice would you two, since you both worked there before me, have given? Like, what was the most advice you gave in 1997? And then what would you give a homebrewer now that, came into your bar and wanted some advice? Start with you, Tom.
Well, so in the early 90s or mid 90s, I would say the number one thing people came in and they're like, oh, I just want to make something easy, like a Pilsner. And you'd be like, okay, wait, full stop, time out. Like, you are now saying that your first beer, you want to make what is actually the most difficult beer style to master on the planet. Something that, an entire country, the Germans have spent thousands of years perfecting and exported around the globe. And you think you're going to do that first time. So we'd always be like, no, maybe you make big pale ale, something with a little color, a little hop, maybe a stout, something that'll mask those early mistakes that you make. So the number one piece of advice I used to give out early is don't think that making a Pilsner is easy. And while that's still true today, with all of the advancements in terms of information that's out there, so many industries now that or so many companies that are specific to making items for homebrewers, the access they have to hops and malts and ingredients that, nobody had back in the 90s. My biggest thing was, if you're going to do it, go all in, go all grain, like make beer the way pros are making it, because homebrewers can do that right off the bat now, with either a book or with the internet, knowledge from your local homebrew store. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you can just jump right in and be making beer literally like the pros right off the bat, which was not always the case in the mid to late 90s.
That's literally why Jack White opened Homebrew Mart, because he was so lazy to drive to El Cajon to beer and wine crafts. And they weren't really all grain specific. You know what I mean? They didn't
No,
really
I remember
have that
buying all
knowledge.
those, remember those English can kits with pre-hopped malt? You
Yeah,
just mix them with water.
it was just above baker's yeast and PBR malt.
Yeah, I remember Jack talking about, I want to sell grain. People just can come and weigh it out, and get all their grain for all grain. Like, that was pretty novel then, right? Like,
Yeah.
not
Well, you
just
actually had to teach people.
packaged. Yeah, and then you guys had to figure out how to make that happen.
I remember the reason I went all grain was that I discovered that instead of the malt extract, you could buy 10 pounds of grain for $6.90. I'm like, wait, 10 pounds of grain will make me 5 gallons of beer for about $7. Oh, I'm in.
No tax.
Yeah.
No tax because it's the food product.
To taste like commercial beers. Like, that was I
That's
wanted
awesome.
to taste better. I wanted to taste beer that was kind of commercial. So for me, it was cleaning. It's what I worked on in the beginning. I had the lab side going on, with chemistry in the beginning. So that's what I tried to talk to people about in the 90s. And it's not very easy because everybody says, oh, yeah, I clean. Everybody. You can ask everybody. Oh, I clean. But microbiology clean is something different. You're not making a pot of pasta sauce. You're making spaghetti sauce. You're making something that's going to go through a fermentation. And when those early brews with Yusuf, I remember him saying something like, "What are you doing with that foil?" Like, I'd have tinfoil, aseptic transfer, cover stuff, do tube transfers instead of pouring. And he would. I didn't realize how unique that was because later on people would just be like, "Oh, what are you doing? That's stupid. You don't do that." He was like, "Oh, let me learn that. How do you do that?" And so I think that the people who really invested, especially in the 90s, in learning cleaning, made better beer. And I don't talk about it as much, although I have other things I talk about. But what's funny is it's still a thing. Like, we still can clean better. Why is not everybody making great beer? Part of that is we're not cleaning great. And it's hard. It's hard to learn. It's hard to do. It's hard to teach somebody to do it on a Friday night at 7 p.m. when they should go home. But hey, no, stick around. Still clean your brewery.
So you guys knew all this back in the day. And one of the reasons I had you both on was that you're still relevant. So, Tom, if you could start and just kind of tell us what's going on with your place and COVID and where they can find the best information to come up and visit you on open days.
So, you mentioned Tyson. So obviously my partner at O'Brien's, we've now turned the restaurant inside out and we're serving in the parking lot. So you can get a beer on the patio, you can get a beer in the parking lot. Landlord's been nice enough to shut down half the parking lot for us. But we're o'brienspub.net there and O'Brien's Pub SD on social media handles. Tyson does a great job of keeping everything up to date on what's happening. Our beer dinner events are coming back on Saturday nights, and the pub is functioning mostly normal, other than the fact that you can't drink inside. You can, however, buy a growler of Pliny to go there, so that's nice. As far as Nickel Beer Company, the current restrictions, we're only open 4 days a week right now, Thursday through Sunday. With the food service restrictions, but we do carry the beer down at West Coast Smoke and Tap House, Garden Kitchen, O'Brien's, a couple of full-time places down there if you can't make it up to Julian. But Nickel Beer Co. is our handle pretty much across all the social media platforms. And certainly Facebook is the place I update the most in terms of what our hours are and what the latest restrictions are on what we're doing.
Where can we get cans, Chris?
Well, you can get our cans to go from White Labs. The tap room there is closed at the moment because of COVID, and we really don't have much outdoor space. We did a little parking lot space, but it's a few tables. So to go, there's a few stores. If you happen to be in Asheville, North Carolina, our restaurant there is open, tap room. But California is a little more closed. But also we'll ship it to you in California. So it's on yeastman.com, our online part of whitelabs.com, and we can ship it to you. People have been doing that, which is nice. We have a couple new beers we're going to can next month. a Pilsner, and a Hazy. And otherwise, we've been operating as good as we can, making yeast every day, as safe as we can, making yeast for the essential beer industry. Doing okay. Being a lab, we had a lot of protocols already in place, which we just spread across the company in the beginning. So PPE, we had a little hard time getting it, but we were already using a lot of it: masks, gloves, gowning, all that things for different clean rooms and stuff. So we just said, hey, the moment you get to work, everybody's wearing this stuff everywhere. We did that in March. And while maybe people around the country have said that kind of stuff, it's been weird to it. People with our company were just happy, like, hey, thanks. I want to feel protected at work. So we've had nobody sick. We've had no issues there, and hopefully we can keep operating like that. It's a difficult time. But we're just trying to make people feel safe at work, and a lot of people are working from home, but a lot of people are there making yeast every day and doing an awesome job.
Hey, Jeff, you got any questions? Okay, good.
No, listen, man. In all honesty, I
have one more.
Oh, okay. We'll get it in, dude.
No. But go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say, listen, it's been a pleasure being able to be, like I said, just a gnat in this pint of beer. That this conversation. You guys are, the Mount Rushmore of San Diego beer. And there's a few other spots on there, and we'll probably have conversations with them in the next few episodes. But what you guys have done for San Diego craft beer scene has directly affected my life intimately. So I have to thank you guys for that. Before you even knew me, before I even knew you, you guys were already shaping what was going to become such a beautiful trajectory that I was going to be on as far as my passion in my life. So being able to kind of hang around and let you guys exchange stories and talk about the good old times over a couple of delicious beers has been quite a treat. And I thank the three of you for it. And I'm very fortunate to be able to kind of hang out with you guys. So thanks a lot, you guys.
Cheers to that.
So going back to 2004, I sat in on your talk at the CBC. 2004? No, that's not right. What is it? When was the
My
CBC
talk?
here? Yeah. When you won?
Yeah. Was it my talk on double IPAs?
That was 04, right?
And double IPAs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the little room.
That was 04.
Wait, I'm not going to tell that story. I got into it was the first time Photoshop worked for me. I'll just leave it there. And one of your quotes, you use the standing on the shoulders of giants. I'd kind of like to ask both of you now, how does it feel to be the giant? Kind of as our last question this evening. And, how does it feel to be, part of that solid generation? And how do you see us going forward with the new generation? And how are they going to stand on your shoulders? Let's start with Chris.
It's hard to say. I mean, my early heroes, were Michael Jackson and Charlie Papazian and George Fix and a whole bunch of others. And, when you first start hearing people saying things like you said earlier, like, hey, White Labs was helpful for San Diego or this and that, it sounded weird to me. Still sounds weird. And I don't know. I guess you just get older. But I
standing on the shoulders of old giants.
I wouldn't have been able to get started without all of those people to look up to and to learn from, and to the people around me. So if I can help others feel that way or do that's awesome. I guess I would say.
That's awesome.
What about you, Tom?
Tom's going to be a lot better.
There's so many people, that you looked up to and inspired you as a brewer, and to think that you're able to do that for anybody else is just very humbling. And, I know all of us on this podcast here are so about the community and the scene of San Diego brewing and what it's meant to us personally, professionally, that, we've all gotten so much from it to be able to give anything back is really just an honor. And I've been so privileged to work with so many amazing people over the 25 plus years I've been here in this industry. And to think about the friendships here, I look back and now it's like, geez, I've known, Colby and Chris and like Tommy and Jeff and, so many people, Jack and Yusuf, in this industry for 25 or more years. It really is kind of a showstopper in terms of like, wow, it's been that long and we've been through all of this together. And now there is a younger generation that, you look at their passion, you look at their creativity, you look at their ingenuity, you look at their resilience in what we're having to go through right now with COVID. Colby, I know we were talking the other day about what the production team is doing at Ballast to make it through all of this. And it's so great to see that, there was a first generation, as I would kind of see it, that kind of passed a torch to a second generation. And now there's kind of a third generation that is just, bringing that fire just as much as anything else. And it's just great to see. And I don't care how much people are drinking seltzers, craft beer is going nowhere.
On that note, cheers to San Diego beers.
Cheers to San Diego beers.
San Diego beers and the people who make them.
Under your belt, Colby, and then 23 years plus. And listen, you guys are an inspiration to that generation you're talking about, Tom. So we appreciate it.
I think welcome all the new young people. It's true. I'm glad that was brought up. Like we need new young people entering this business, this making beer. And I always like asking what they're interested in. So right now, maybe it's hard seltzer, but we shall see. There'll be something else that'll come. That'll be awesome.
Cyclical. It's always going to come back to good old beer. So you guys.
We used to all love barley wine at some point. Things change. It's okay.
All right, gentlemen. Listen, it's been a pleasure.
Jeff, I appreciate your friendship, and I appreciate your friendship too, Tom and Chris. So thanks for spending your time with us.
No, you guys.
Appreciate the 32 ounce of Saludos.
I'm honored. All right, guys, thanks for tuning into that episode. That was fun. It's always a pleasure to be in the presence of such craft beer greatness. Stay tuned for the next few episodes. We're going to be bringing on a few more of Colby's friends, and you're going to be able to sit in on those conversations about Ballast Point's history and how we've been shaped through our friends and family. Let's go ahead and grab a couple of beers for those episodes. Cheers, you guys. Be safe out there and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, wherever. Cheers.